Hello, everybody. I am back. This is my first video in a couple of weeks. I was out of town, so I didn't really have the opportunity to make any Bloodborne videos, but I was, as I always am, thinking about Bloodborne quite a bit, or at least the story about it. I think about it, from time to time. I had a 6-hour flight to Seattle, and I actually was reading my Lovecraft book, my compilation of all of Lovecraft short stories, which I've gone through a million times, and I was actually reading that on the plane ride, and so, I was just thinking about it a little bit. But you don't care about that. Today, before actually I talk about today's subject, I do want to note, make a quick addendum to last week's video. In the Reddit thread I posted on it, somebody here, a user named Ambiguous Waters, noted that, and bear with me because I'm still used to this whole picture-in-picture thing. Noticed that on the Rune Workshop tool, he says, "Holy damn! I've just realized something. Doesn't the odd object in the Rune Workshop tool's inventory picture look like the hunter's mark when the angles are changed a little bit?" I'm going to show it. That's super cool. I must have looked at that item 1,000 times, and I never noticed that. That's totally the hunter's mark. That's really cool. What are the implications of that? I don't know. It looks kind of like an actual physical brand. I don't know. Whatever. That's cool. Anyway, thank you for pointing that out to me, Ambiguous Waters. Today, we're going to talk about the doll. And I know. This is the little things in Yharnam. We don't talk about the really big things, and the doll is probably the biggest thing in Bloodborne. But we're going to talk about just one little aspect of the doll that has actually a lot of people have been talking about lately in community forums and discussions, and that is the rare dialogue she has, in which she, if you're unfamiliar, there is a very rare dialogue where if you enter the hunter's dream, most players, I would say, have encountered a moment where they enter the hunter's dream and the doll is asleep and she's snoring, and you can wake her up and she'll apologize for being asleep, and she'll just move on with her dialogue. Most players have encountered that, but there's a very, very rare dialogue where she will be at a grave praying, and she utters this sort of poem about the flowers of the moon and the little ones, and she prays for the guidance of the the hunter. And so we're gonna unpack that in a little bit. I'm actually gonna open it up real quick because I don't have it offhand, and while I'm doing that, I just want to talk about that dialogue. I don't know what triggers it. I have encountered it, although most players have not. Which is actually something I was unaware of for a while. Most people have not seen that dialogue. I don't know what triggers it, but something to think about. And let me just go ahead and open this up real quick. All right, so I've got this. Now, we're going to go over that later. What I really want to talk about are flowers, because a lot of people talk about flora of the moon. And the reason they talk about that is because of the fact that the word flora, which means plant life, is capitalized, which kind of makes it sound as if the doll is addressing a thing, person, great one, whatever, as flora, referring to something as flora. Honestly, I think, and that's a theory that's been going on for a long time. Honestly, I think that's kind of nonsense. I'm sorry, I know, but it's, at least the way I view it is that is a use of a poetic inflection in order to emphasize that, in order to sort of in Shakespearean style, take a word and make it about more than just that word. And I'm going to sort of explain what I'm talking about, because that doesn't make any sense yet. So I want to talk about flowers in Bloodborne, because there are flowers in a couple different places, And there is a flower that most people, in fact, I'd say the vast majority of people, don't really think about as being associated with flowers. So for starters, where do we find flowers in Bloodborne? We find flowers in the Hunter's Dream, of course. They're everywhere. That's where they are, most famously. We find these beautiful flowers. It's sort of like a garden, and it's sort of reminiscent of the messengers, the way they sort of sprout out of the ground, and there are and that sort of thing. And it looks, I don't know, it's very pretty, and especially in that, battle arena sort of thing underneath the great tree where you end up fighting Gehrman at the very end. It's really beautiful. And we find those flowers, which I'm going to go ahead and call Lumen flowers. I'm going to call those Lumen flowers. Those specific flowers. Just because it kind of fits. And there is a place in the Upper Cathedral Ward called the Lumen Flower Gardens. And if we recall, the Upper Cathedral Ward is where the choir did all of their research. And it really seemed like they were trying to replicate the success of Master Willem. That is the implication I get from their experiments. We find a desiccated corpse of Rom. Well, not of Rom, but of a Rom-like creature, or maybe that type of great one, maybe that species name is Rom, but we find a corpse that looks an awful lot like Rom in the orphanage. We also find in the Lumen Flower Gardens the Celestial Emissary, which supposedly was one of the ways in which the Healing Church tried to commune with the Great Ones, possibly Ebertas. And it all seems like they're trying to recreate what happened at Bergenworth. And we find those Lumen flowers in the Moonside Lake on the back of Rom, which is kind of curious because, as far as we know, Rom doesn't have any connection to the Hunter's Dream. So what's the deal there? We also find the flowers sort of scattered about. There are flowers in a couple of places in Yharnam, but they're not really that specific. The Lumen flowers, which are glowing, they're luminescent, they grow only in the dream. And something that a lot of people don't talk about a lot is the Moonside Lake, which is where you fight Rom. And personally, I actually think that is another part of the Dreamlands that you fall into by falling through the lake. You fall into a part of the alternate reality that are the Dreamlands, which is where she lives in that little section of the Dreamlands. I think that's why you can see Yharnam in the Moonside Lake, because you see Yharnam's manifestation in the Moonside Lake and in the Nightmare of Mensis. She doesn't appear to be able to project herself into the real world. We don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, the flowers. O Flora of the Moon of the Dream. That's the first sentence of the doll's dialogue. And the doll is kind of like a flower herself. And please allow me to explain that. So there's a very rough, awkward, not mistranslation, but misunderstanding and mislocalization, I believe, that occurs in the transition from the Japanese text to the English text, and then back from the English text to the Japanese text. Because a lot of the text in the game, the dialogue, for example, is written first in English and then translated into Japan. But there's a cultural aspect of Bloodborne that gets lost immediately by Western audiences. And we find that cultural reference in the Winter Lanterns. Now, the Winter Lanterns are those monsters in the Nightmare that have the eyes on their brains, and they have the tentacles, and they sing, and they cause frenzy just by looking at them. Everybody knows the fucking Winter Lanterns. But the name Winter Lantern is kind of weird. And if you're, I'm an American like I am, you probably don't really get it. You would probably associate that name with, I don't know, like a bleak sort of, dark, depressing sort of collection, that sort of thing. And you'd probably also associate them with the lamps that you find everywhere. But what the Winter Lanterns are called in Japan, in the Japanese version of the game, are Hozuki. A Hozuki flower, also sometimes called a lantern flower, a winter flower, is a very important flower in the Japanese Bone Festival, which is where lights are... I'm not an expert on it, but from my very poor Western understanding of it, it's a festival where you place candles inside of these blooming flowers, and you leave them on the river, and then they drift off, and supposedly those winter lanterns, the Hozuki, are supposed to guide the spirits of the dead. You can look up more on the Bone Festival. I am not an expert, nor will I pretend to be, but there's a very, very important bit of Japanese culture that gets lost immediately to Western audiences. Because when we see the Winter Lanterns, we go, it's a weird name, right? But Hozuki, those flowers that guide the spirits of the dead. And so if we think about the Winter Lanterns as being sort of embodiments of that flower, it kind of makes us think about the doll. Because the doll is, as I and a few other people have gone over, the doll is a Winter Lantern. The Winter Lanterns are dolls. The relationship between them is not clear, but the Winter Lanterns are wearing the doll's clothing. They're the same height as the doll. They have grooves in their claws, which some people, myself included, have looked at and have gone, yeah, those kind of look like the jointed fingers in the doll. They sing, which is kind of strange, but the doll also prays. And the Winter Lanterns, their brains are composed of messenger corpses. O Flora, of the moon, of the dream. Those are our Lumen flowers. We find them in the Moonside Lake. We find them in the Hunter's Train. O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients. So that brings us to the messengers and where they fit into Flora and, this prayer. And now we're getting into... I don't want to get into the really complicated, super speculative stuff, because that's not what this is supposed to be about. But just think about this. If the doll is a Winter Lantern, a Hozuki, that means that she is supposed to be guiding the spirits of the dead. What implications does that have for the player? Who knows? This was a really short, sort of quick video that I just wanted to pump out. It's actually 1 a.m. here. I just got back from a long trip to Seattle. I had a great time. But I just sort of wanted to pump this out and get my sort of creative juices flowing again. So sorry if this video isn't up to your high standards, but I am totally fucking exhausted. I just wanted to chat a little bit in front of the camera. If you like this, leave a message below. Please tell me if I missed anything. Leave comments on what you want to talk about. I think next time I'd like to talk about dark beasts and exactly what dark beasts are. I think that would be something cool to talk about. So if you have any questions about dark beasts, anything having to do with Dark Beasts, you know, feel free to post those down below. And thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Real quick, one thing I totally forgot to mention. The Bone Festival, the Japanese Bone Festival, gets its root name from the Sanskrit word urambana, which means hanging upside down. So, have fun thinking about that.